Hello friends, welcome to the EduSite Network. Our today's topic of discussion is later 19th century American literature, and for this discussion we have this in the studio Dr. Bhim Singh Daya, former Vice Chancellor, Kurukshetra University and Professor of English Literature. He has to his credit several books on Anglo-American literature and higher education, including The Hero in Hemingway, poet critics on Shakespeare, and the University Autonomy in India, among many other publications. And with this we shall welcome sir to our EduSat network, and we request him to begin our today's lecture.
Thank you. Well, later 19th century literature in America is in a way second phase of the American literature after its independence in 1776. The first phase, headed by Emerson, Thoreau, Hawthorne, Melville, these writers, was called the period of romanticism, of idealism and transcendentalism. There was enthusiasm for new freedom, new republic, and the writers were searching for new identity for their nation and for their literature. But then basically these writers of the northeastern America had their strong roots in British culture, and they were influenced by the British romanticism. So their identity was a sort of continuity of the colonial culture. But then conditions of life change, history changes, and so does literature of any country, every country. In America, several things were happening in the later 19th century. Politically speaking, there was the issue of human rights, equal rights, independence, not merely from the British colonial past, but also from the New England dominance. Emerson, Thoreau, etc., they were from New England, which is the northeastern, along the Atlantic, because they came from Europe, settled there. Boston was their spiritual capital. And that's why, because of their strong, inclination to spiritualism, to transcendentalism, they were called Brahmins, American Brahmins. They very much believed in the spiritual life and its projection in society. But in the later 19th century, there was large-scale migration from Europe to America, and not from England. It was from Germany, it was from Norway, and it was from other countries of Europe, but not Britain. And the migration was taking place because there was tremendous expansion, clearance of the forests, reaching the frontier to the southwest of America. Because before independence, just a small part of the continent was inhabited by these immigrants, by these pioneers, explorers. But in the later 19th century, because of large-scale industrialization, lot of people were needed, and the population of America multiplied from 6 lakhs to 40, 50 lakhs. That's how it multiplied so fast. And that's why expansion took place. And America, from the colonial Atlantic Republic, became the continental nation. And the real America now lived in the southwest. More states of America out of 52 now came up in these parts, and they were, clearing the forests, making it fit for agriculture and for industry. So all this was happening. At the same time, there was the question of slavery. Because right from the settlement of America in the early 17th century, from 1607, labor was needed, and cheap labor was needed to make it habitable, to make it fit for agriculture. And the cheapest labor was from Africa, because they were starving people. They would work for any price, for a penny. But now they have lived there for 200 years. They had acquired some culture, some values. They also wanted to be considered as human beings and demanded equality. So that became an issue in the mid-19th century. But as it happens both in life and literature, things do not take place overnight. Events do not happen abruptly. It takes time to evolve things, to develop things. And everything begins with an idea, but ultimately ends up with an event, historical event. So the idea of abolishing the slavery had come up right at the time of Emerson. Besides Emerson and Thoreau, you remember, we name another, Alcott and William Garrison. Now, William Garrison was the one who started a journal called The Liberator in 1831. In fact, Emerson's essays came in 1832. He had started this journal in 1831. There was another before him who was murdered because he had raised the question of abolishing the slavery. His house was burnt, he was murdered, but then the issue was taken up by William Garrison. And then soon after came a poet who was influenced by Robert Burns, You remember Burns wrote Scottish is a folk poetry, folk songs, and this American poet from the rural area, using the language of the people, he wrote poetry, and from 1832 to 1850 almost, he devoted all his time to the issue of abolishing the slavery. And then came that woman who became famous for that very issue. She was Harriet Beecher Stowe, Stowe, who wrote that famous novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852. In fact, Abraham Lincoln, when he wanted to honor her, he saw that little woman and made a remark that you are that little woman who brought about a revolution in this country, made abolition of slavery a real issue. And that is where Civil War came in 1865, because South was agrarian by and large, North was industrialized, and it were the landowners of the South who had the largest number of slaves, the Negroes, the black people, and they wanted to continue with the right to maintain slaves. But enlightened people like Abraham Lincoln, they wanted this to be abolished and give equal rights to every citizen of America, irrespective of race, color, ethnicity, and so on. Hence came the Civil War of 1865. So 1865 becomes the turning point in the history of America, as well as in the history of American literature. Because after 1865, there was no place for Emersonian idealism, no place for Emersonian romanticism, because now there were the hard facts of industrial society, and you had people working from morning till evening, having hard life in the industry. So America now was totally transformed. And when you have these conditions, then you can't have romantic exploration, because you don't have the vast, mysterious nature open to you for exploration. Now you have the harsh realities of life to face. Hence came realism in literature. And the man who articulated the poetics of realism was William Dean Howells. William Dean Howells was from the West, followed by Mark Twain. Mark Twain again was from Southwest. So now the center was shifting from Northeast to Southwest. No longer New England dominance. Now there is larger America, the continental nation, and now it is being dominated by these writers, William Dean Howells and Mark Twain. Mark Twain was not much of a theorist, but William Dean Howells was. He defined realism for the American writers. He said literature should cease telling lies about life, because he thought romanticism was nothing but lies, because it speaks of things which are not there, things which are more in the imagination than in real life. He said literature henceforth should describe real men and women, the life lived by them, not by imaginary people. Hence, the whole tone and tenor of American literature changed. And we see now no longer the colonial explorer, no longer the romantic adventurer as hero of literature. Now you have the industrial man as hero. For example, William Dean Howells's famous novel, The Rise of Silas Lapham, L-A-P-H-A-M, The Rise of Silas Lapham. How in industrial society he makes a beginning, a humble beginning, and then through entrepreneurship rises to the height. So it was this world where entrepreneurship rather than exploration, rather than pioneering spirit dominated. Similarly, William Dean Howells wrote another novel. He wrote too many, but another famous novel was A Modern Instance. A Modern Instance. Again, is he focused on the life here and now, life in your backyard, not life in your imagination. So he came out with these novels, and then from the southwest, as I said, Mark Twain, who became even more famous than William Dean Howells. His books have the wonderful quality of speaking to different levels of human mind. They can be read by children. You remember his Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Adventures of Tom Sawyer. These are prescribed in schools also, and they are also prescribed for higher studies, research level at MA and MPhil. So he could speak simultaneously at various levels. He had that wonderful quality. He wrote too many. For example, Roughing It, where it's a sort of travelogue, traveling through the Middle East, coming right to India, having a camel ride or an elephant ride and writing about it. So Roughing It is full of all that. Or Life on the Mississippi, because Mississippi, like our Ganga River, she runs through most parts of America, the biggest river. It changes names, of course, in different states, like the state of Ohio where I was, Cincinnati, it was called Ohio River. Down south, Mississippi River. So it changes names, but then the river is the same, and vast river. So the population along this, you see, that is what gets described in the realist novel of Howell, William Dean Howells, as well as Mark Twain. Another quality of this novel is that they are describing a society which is inward looking. You see the interior of America, whereas the society along the Atlantic, New England society, was always looking towards Europe, across the seas. You remember Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, when the crucial moment comes, Hester Prynne tells that timid priest, she says, there is another world across the seas, across Atlantic. We can go there and have our freedom and escape these tyrannical Puritans and so on. So they always looked back to England and Europe for culture, for values, for literature, for politics, everything. But now the Southwest is inward looking, the vast continent, there is no sea around to look across. They look within themselves, within their own interior, and that is why you do not have that consciousness of the other world. It's a world by itself. It's a continental nation, so vast, and that's why Mark Twain writes about that life. In such a life, another element which is important is humor. You see, the New England writers, Emerson and company, those romantics, they were humorless because they were idealists. They wanted perfection of life, perfection of values, even Puritanism in its purest form, or Romanticism in its purest form. But human nature being what it is, you cannot have anything in purity, anything in ideal conditions. It has to be a mix. That is why you remember Hawthorne says at the end of one of his stories, even in the Scarlet Letter, that very soon these enthusiasts of Puritan religion, they realized that idealism is not possible because man is mortal and man is flawed, fallen. Therefore, they realized the necessity of having a prison house, because man will make mistakes, will commit crimes also, and the necessity for cemetery. People will die too, they are mortal. But then you see, when you come to later 19th century, when you come to realist literature, here is life accepted in all its forms, its virtues as well as its deficiencies. That is why the late romantic, the problematic romantic Walt Whitman, he provides a link between romanticism and realism, because if you remember, his Leaves of Grass came in 1855, when almost all the work by Emerson and Thoreau had been done, finished, completed. So he starts there, and by the time he completes his life in 1891, you see, industrialization has matured to its final stage. That is why you find in Whitman's poetry celebration of real life. There is idealism, but at the same time there is realism. So he successfully combines both romanticism as well as realism, idealism as well as realism. So he combines in his poetry and takes us into the other world. In such a life where acceptance is fundamental, acceptance of life as it is, not life as it ought to be, because Emerson, Thoreau and company, they were looking for life as it ought to be. Even the dissenters like Melville and Hawthorne, they were idealists too, although they were disillusioned, they were skeptic, they saw evil in life and they were seized of evil. Moby Dick is an exploration of evil to its very depth, but at the same time they do not throw away their idealism. Even in the face of evil, They want to maintain their idealism and they want to stick to those idealistic values. But a realist would not do. That's why even in Melville and Hawthorne there is no humor. But Mark Twain and Howells, they are full of humor. Mark Twain is nothing but humor. He can't say anything without humor. So that is the wonderful quality of his novels, and he is still enjoyed. That is the, in a way, early phase of later 19th century, means the age of realism. But as it happens in the case of every age, generally it splits into two phases, the early and the later. Just as you have early romantic in Emerson, you have a late romantic in Melville or Whitman. Similarly, you have late realists in the end 19th century. In fact, it goes up to 20th. That's why the age of realism we limit from 1865 to 1915 or 1914, beginning of World War I, because after World War I another age begins. Just as after the Civil War of 1865 another age had begun, realism. So this later phase is marked by slightly changed tone and tenor of literature, as it always happens, because it will now cater to further changed condition, and it will look forward to what is coming. It will not keep looking to what is gone. Now what is coming? And a new world is coming in the 20th century. And that's why you have writers like Frank Norris. You see, Frank Norris wrote Meteague, M-C-T-E-A-G-U-E, Meteague. And he also wrote Octopus. Similarly, Jack London, he wrote The Cry of the Wild. Imagine, you see, using the animal imagery, both Norris and Jack London, because they are acknowledging the rock bottom of human nature, which is not different from the animal. Hence, that is the part of realism. And they were influenced by Darwin. Just as in England, the later Victorians, like Thomas Hardy, they were George Eliot, influenced by Darwinian theory of evolution, relating man ultimately to other species, to animal species, as one of the animals, more developed species, but not very different from other species. That's why Darwinian theory of evolution is applied by Darwin to human society. That human societies also evolve. Evolution takes place there also. Some are more evolved, some are less evolved. So same was the case in America. You had more evolved in the Northeast, so mature culture, but less evolved in the Southwest, and hence closer to the animal life and the real life. I think I give you time for questions.
All right, thank you so much, sir. And we'll continue our discussion of later 19th century American literature as of now. So, sir, as you mentioned that Whitman could also be called a realist writer, as he brings in both elements of romanticism and realism. So, he classifies to be both a romanticist and can we say both a realist as well?
Well, yes, he is a problematic writer, just as Melville is, because he is not ready to abandon idealism, abandon romanticism. At the same time, he wants to embrace new realities of life, and the new realities were coming from the industrial society. That is why you remember he embraces both materialism as well as spiritualism, whereas Emerson, Alcott would not do that. Thoreau, they will embrace only spiritualism, transcendentalism, life of soul and not life of body. But you remember Whitman, I sing for the soul,
Yes.
I sing for the body, I sing for equality, I sing for the complete man.
Yes, definitely.
So, he was a poet of the whole life, and whole life both of the individual as well as society. He doesn't discard anything. He says even the ugliest of aspects of life I embrace.
Right.
It will not be done by Emerson or Thoreau.
Thoreau. So, in that sense, Whitman, although he is harking back to the past, he is probably also moving towards the future. So
Sure.
he is embracing, like you use the term, I embrace.
In fact, in his major poems, he projects a vision of the future. Even the railway network that came up in the later 19th century, without which expansion would not have been possible. Growth of industry and agriculture would not have been possible. He celebrates that, and he visualizes that this rail link will connect us to the east, to Middle East, then Far East, India, China, and so on. So he had, right in the late 19th century, the global vision of the future, that in future world will be one. And he speaks for democracy, and he says democracy now in America, in future the whole of the world. So in a way he was a poet of future, futuristic writer who could foresee tomorrow, that this is the direction in which the world is moving.
Definitely. So then we can say, like you said, he did have a foresight and he did have an idea what was to come, and he was also ready to embrace that.
Yeah, when the Suez Canal was opened, again he wrote a poem and celebrating the link between East and West, celebrating a unified world which will be one and which will be democratic. He never, sacrificed democracy for his idealism. Emerson, Thoreau, they were conservatives. They were not Democrats, but he was a Democrat through and through, first and last. So he always sang for democracy. You remember his long prose essay, Democratic Vistas. So there he works out his philosophy of democracy, and democracy as it will unite the whole world.
Right. And so he, of course, was envisioning a better world also by doing that, by envisioning a world where there is democracy.
Exactly.
So, sir, as we talked about novels which capture the Civil War experience, which basically say that slavery was going to be abolished and Abraham Lincoln had taken up this project. So, in that sense, could we also include Gone with the Wind as a realist novel? Because Gone with the Wind also talks about the whole Civil War experience and how slavery was being abolished from being seeing these workers work on cotton fields. We find them getting freedom.
Yeah, of course. And you remember the movie which
Yes,
became very
yes.
popular.
Definitely.
Even today, you say people rush for it. So it projects that world, what it was like and what it could become tomorrow. Another writer, you see, the novelist, who had written a novel on the Civil War was Stephen Crane. You remember his famous novel? Which became a model for Hemingway. When he came to write about First World War, I used Stephen Crane. It's slipping my mind. Yeah, he wrote a sort of history of the Civil War in his novel, and he wrote also a novel on Maggie, a girl from the streets.
Right.
Imagine. So it is not always women who are feminists. You see, male writers have also been speaking for the rights of women, and Stephen Crane was one of them. He wrote this novel. Of course, there were women writers also. We'll talk about them later, who are not really given as much space as they deserve. If you look into the American literature syllabus we prescribe in our Indian universities, there is hardly a woman who finds a place in the curriculum, except of course once in a while Emily Dickinson,
Yes.
a poet. But she was of the stock of Emerson and so on, because more of spiritualism, more of space. Yeah, by the way, it reminds me of an important aspect we have left out of the age of realism. You see, when you have too much of materialism, too much of mundane life, which industry always brings, then you find that certain finer aspects of life they get buried, they get ignored, and the sensitive minds they want to retain that sensitive part of human life. In this context, you see two writers, Henry James and Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson in poetry, Henry James in fiction. And he was a theorist of his own kind of realism. He was more of a technician. So the technical aspect of the realist novel and how to experiment with technique to give multi-dimensions to the reality which you are capturing in your narrative. Now that job was done by Henry James, and like Mark Twain, he wrote so many novels, over 24. Most famous, you know, The Portrait of a Lady.
Yes.
But there were others, the Americans, what Maggie said, so on and so forth. Daisy, sorry. There were so many. But he is best known by the Americans, of course, but more so by the portrait of a lady.
Of a lady, yes.
So, what do you have in the portrait of a lady? Here is a girl growing in the rough and tumble of an industrial society, but then you see, trying to retain her sensitive moments, that life which cares for culture, which cares for values, although ultimately she is taken in by the shame of culture. That rascal, Gilbert Osmond, he carries a facade of a man of culture around him.
Right.
He has collected museum pieces from the Italian painters, sculptors, so on and so forth. And she thought he was an ideal man of culture. So she marries him. But ultimately she discovers that he is a snake in the bush. She uses that imagery, satanic.
Yes.
It is like a Satan. And he was married once. He had a daughter grown up almost the age of Isabel Archer. Never tells her. So just she hooks her through bait of this culture, so on and so forth. So Henry James is one novelist in this age. Of course, he continued writing in the 20th century also. Many of his novels, half of his novels came out in the 20th century, even right up to First World War. Similarly, the poetess, again forgetting.
Sir, Emily Dickinson.
Emily Dickinson, sorry, thank you. Emily Dickinson again tried to retain that sensitive aspect of life which was getting lost in the rough and tumble of industrialization, in the expansion, and all kinds of people rushing in for jobs, and therefore destroying culture, destroying the sensitive aspects of life. Working class, always
Definitely.
does. So they may be called highbrow, they may be called elitist, they may be called, spiritualists or idealists, but they were not less realists, because realism does not mean merely the seamy side of life.
Right.
Unfortunately, literary theorists and historians generally associate realism with the seamy side of life, darker side of life, rough side of life, whereas the fact remains that it took care of both the rough as well as the sensitive. So there were writers like Henry James who took care of the sensitive side. Sorry.
Right. So as we discuss a different aspect of realism, and that realism has both a rough and sensitive side, and of course then we see that Henry James and Emily Dickinson take care of the sensitive aspect of life. And earlier we were just talking about novels that brought out the idea of slavery, and sir, you also mentioned.
That reminds me, Stephen Crane's famous novel,
Okay, yes.
The Red Badge of Courage. I was forgetting.
Yes.
The Red Badge of Courage, in fact the most important novel of the period, which directly depicts the Civil War. And you have the hero of the Civil War, the abolitionist, who carries the flag against slavery. So it is that powerful novel.
Right. So, one can use it as a good read if they want to learn about the
Yes,
period and
sure.
see how the idea of realism works within the novel. So,
Exactly.
The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. So, you also mentioned Harriet Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, and was that also contributing towards abolition of slavery, raising the consciousness of people?
Yeah, in fact, the maximum contribution came from that. And in 1 year alone, it sold over 6 lakh copies. Imagine, this was not even the entire population of that country at one time, it means early century. But this came out in 1852. And then several times more, the number of copies pirated.
Oh, wonderful. That's remarkable.
Yeah, maybe say 20, 30 lakh copies selling not only all over America, even in Europe and the outside world.
Right.
So she in fact brought about the real revolution for the abolition of slavery. And this Uncle Tom in fact is a black slave. And the kind of character he emerges, you see, Stowe shows him to be a humane character and wants to show that he is not inferior to anyone. He is as much of a humane character as anyone else, and therefore, just because he is colored, you cannot discriminate against him.
Right. So, now we talked about this angle, and sir, if we can talk a bit about Mark Twain and his writing style. It has been said that he used a very journalistic style and also made use of a lot of humor. Say, humor developed in a new form in his writings, which was not there earlier.
Yeah, of course. I think he was. Of course, there was a tradition in the Southwest of humor. If you read the history of American literature, you see that. But this was, you see, local folk tradition of humor, which Mark Twain adopted and gave it a literary form, literary shape, a more respectable form and more sophisticated also. And through humor, in fact, you can provide a more serious critique of society than you can do otherwise. Because if you become a serious a preacher, for example, for a particular philosophy or a set of values, people wouldn't really take you seriously. We know he is a preacher. We know what he is going to say. But a man who has a sense of humor, he immediately involves you into the story, into the narrative.
Definitely.
And he will be more effective with you. I'll give you one example. In his first novel, Dickens, contemporary of Mark Twain, he was doing the same thing. In fact, Mark Twain borrows a good deal from Dickens. Now, Dickens does not agree with the philosophy of his time. You know, the empirical philosophers in England, they were trying to reduce human nature to Royal Society of England agenda. You know, it was set up by the scientists of the time, and they said, we want to do research and we don't accept any truth which is not empirical. Now, Mark Twain would say everything cannot be measured empirically.
Right.
There are things, and which he shows in Huckleberry Finn, when Huckleberry runs away from home and lives in the company of the nigger Jim,
Yes.
who is like Uncle Tom.
Yes.
He becomes his Uncle Tom. In fact, Mark Twain is borrowing from Stowe there. Now coming back to Dickens, so Dickens wants to satirize these scientists and philosophers of the Royal Society. He says one day somebody comes to meet Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Pickwick had his club of Pickwickians, just like the Royal Society, where he said he and his friends, they wanted to do high-minded research in the universe, so on and so forth. So when this person comes, stranger comes to meet him, he rings the bell and Mr. Pickwick comes out on the first floor in the balcony. And Dickens says, first he looked to the left and he surveyed the whole street, he names the street. And then he looked to the right, he surveys again the street to the right. He didn't see anyone either to the left or to the right. He says, then he looked into the skies. Maybe somebody from there. But he didn't find anyone there. But he would not look down on the ground where the man is standing. Dickens says, that is the quality of great minds, not to see the obvious. They'll speak of big things, but they will overlook the small ones, the real things of life. So it is his realism. It is Mark Twain's realism of the same kind. So through humor, he will communicate his point. And make his point.
So it can be slightly satirical or even ironical.
Yeah, of course. That is a part of realism. And by the way, that reminds me, as Emerson, Thoreau, and their colleagues looked up to the English writers for guidance, it may be Wordsworth or Coleridge, Shelley, Keats, and so on. These writers did not look to the British. They looked to the continental writers like Turgenev, Balzac. Balzac was French, Turgenev was Russian. They became the model for the American realists. And Balzac followed Darwinian kind of, thought that there is evolution and you can't detach man's nature from animal nature. It will always remain there. You have to accept it. So realism is another name for acceptance of reality.
Right. Sir, can we also say that a style that Mark Twain adopted was very vernacular? He did not bring very high polished form of language, and also the way characters speak in his novels are the way real people speak. And he brought about a distinctive American style, putting in local dialects or newly invented words or regional dialects into his writing.
Exactly. For the first time. Otherwise, before him, even the novelists, prose writers, they were using academic language, bookish English. He was the one for the first time who used the dialect of the people, the vernacular, how people speak in their daily life to each other. So he adopted the same language. At times, of course, foreigners like us face difficulty in following that dialect. But then that is the quality of realist literature, because in a sense, realism and regionalism go together.
Right.
Where you cannot make it universal. Romantic literature, literature of exploration, idealistic literature, that will always be universal. But realist literature has to speak to local people. Therefore, it will be vernacular. It will use dialect rather than standard language, not standard English, not OED Oxford English Dictionary.
Yes.
It will use as people speak, illiterate people, and that's what Mark Twain does.
Mark Twain does. And he also captures very nicely how the slave Jim speaks, how the nigger speaks.
Yeah, the nigger's English is very different from the white man's English. The two really cannot at times communicate with each other. A white man can only make fun of the black, the way they speak, because their African sounds they come. So you see, native sounds, even centuries old, they will always interfere, like they do in our case.
Right.
However hard you may try to speak like an Englishman, your Hindi, your Tamil, your Punjabi will always creep into your sounds.
Definitely, your dialect and your
it will always come.
Accent.
You remember Kushwan saying, translating Punjabi into English, which the Englishman may not understand, although it is written in English, but expressions, our phrases, our idioms, borrowed from our local languages.
Definitely.
They are translated into English. That is why David Crystal rightly says that now when the world is liberated after World War II, we do not have one King's English or Queen's English. We have now several Englishes, Indian English, Caribbean English, Chinese English, so on and so forth.
Right. So, friends, as we draw to the close of the lecture, we would like to conclude our today's lecture, and we will be here tomorrow again to talk more about American literature, more on 20th century American literature, and we will have Sir with us, and let us thank Sir for being here today, and also let us thank Sir again for being part of this series on American literature, which we shall continue this month and next month as well. So, thank you viewers for watching. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.